In Washington, a major legal decision has reshaped the boundaries of presidential power. A United States appeals court has ruled that President Donald Trump is legally authorized to deploy National Guard troops to the city of Portland, Oregon, despite objections from the state's own elected leaders. The 2-1 ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals represents a sharp victory for the White House and the Department of Justice, which had argued for months that federal intervention was necessary to restore order in a city they described as overwhelmed by crime and unrest. The court's decision suspends an earlier injunction that had blocked Trump's plan to send troops to the Pacific Northwest. President Trump had originally ordered the deployment of 200 National Guard soldiers in September, directing them to assist law enforcement during a wave of protests that had begun over his administration's anti-immigration policies. The protests, according to Oregon officials, were largely under control, but the president framed the move as part of a broader national strategy. A campaign, he said, to reclaim public safety and to impose law and order in cities run by Democratic governors and mayors. Standing before reporters at the White House, the president declared, "We will restore law and order in every American city." His words echoed his first-term language, reviving a theme that has long defined his domestic agenda. The Justice Department defended the decision as constitutional, citing the president's authority under the Insurrection Act and the National Guard statutes. The administration argued that the federal government has both the right and the obligation to protect federal buildings and personnel and to ensure the safety of citizens when local authorities cannot. But Oregon's leadership saw it differently. Governor Kate Brown condemned the federal order as a politically motivated stunt, saying it was meant to stoke division rather than protect residents. Portland's mayor warned that the arrival of troops could trigger confrontation and inflame tensions in a city that has already endured months of demonstrations and sporadic clashes. In Portland's downtown streets, protesters continued to gather, holding banners denouncing what they called the militarization of dissent. Marchers chanted, "If Black Lives Matter, prove it," and "If Black Lives Matter, show it," echoing the rhythm of the 2020 protests that once filled the same streets. The city that had been a symbol of grassroots activism was again becoming a testing ground for the balance between security and freedom. As the ruling was announced, Trump doubled down on his stance. He told reporters, "When a city fails to keep its people safe, we will step in." For the president, Portland is more than just a policy dispute. It's a showcase of federal authority, a reminder to other states that Washington can and will intervene when it sees fit. Since returning to the White House in January, Trump has embraced what aides call a restoration of domestic order campaign. It involves not only immigration enforcement, but also stricter oversight of state policing practices and an expanded role for federal agencies in urban areas. Analysts say this effort targets Democratic-led regions in particular, including Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland, cities the president often portrays as lawless, unsafe, and in need of federal discipline. In the court's written opinion, the majority cited the president's responsibility to safeguard federal interests and to ensure national stability. They argued that while states possess broad authority over local policing, the federal government retains emergency powers when national security or federal property is at risk. But in a sharply worded dissent, Judge Susan Graber warned that the decision erodes fundamental constitutional principles of assembly and the right to object to government policies and actions. Her opinion framed the ruling as a dangerous precedent, one that allows the executive branch to use the military in situations where peaceful protest, not rebellion, is taking place. Legal scholars across the country quickly weighed in. Some described the ruling as a logical extension of executive power during times of civil disturbance. Others said it represented a step toward normalizing military presence in civilian spaces. For civil liberties advocates, the case symbolizes a broader erosion of democratic norms, an America where protest can be answered not with dialogue, but with deployment. As night falls over Portland, the city braces once more for the arrival of armed troops. Convoys of National Guard vehicles are expected to roll in within days, joining local police at federal courthouses, transportation hubs, and downtown intersections. For residents, the presence of soldiers in uniform feels both surreal and familiar, a repeat of images that once defined the early 2020s. Local activists say they will continue to rally peacefully, hoping to avoid the kind of confrontation that turned earlier demonstrations into scenes of tear gas and flash grenades. Civic groups are preparing legal observers and medics, determined to ensure that protests remain organised and safe. Community leaders have issued appeals for calm, urging demonstrators to stand their ground without violence. The White House insists the deployment will be limited and temporary. Officials say troops will not engage in arrests or patrol neighbourhoods, but will instead guard key government facilities and assist in intelligence coordination. Yet critics remain sceptical. They point to past deployments that began as brief interventions and extended for months, reshaping the relationship between the military and civilian populations. The Oregon Attorney General has already announced plans to review the scope of federal involvement and demand clear accountability measures. State officials are seeking a timeline for withdrawal and guarantees that the National Guard's role will not expand beyond what the court has approved. For President Trump, the Portland ruling comes at a politically opportune moment. His administration has faced mounting criticism over immigration raids, deportations, and executive orders that target sanctuary cities. By emphasizing law enforcement victories, Trump seeks to reassert his image as the defender of American stability, the leader willing to confront what he calls chaos in liberal cities. The decision also resonates with Trump's broader electoral message that strong leadership requires decisive action, even if it challenges established norms. At rallies and press events, he frequently contrasts his approach with that of his predecessors, describing himself as the only president willing to do what others are afraid to do. To his supporters, this Portland decision is proof that he delivers on promises. To his opponents, it is a symbol of creeping authoritarianism, a warning of what happens when fear overrides restraint. Meanwhile, national civil rights organizations are preparing for the next legal chapter. The American Civil Liberties Union and several Oregon advocacy groups are expected to file new lawsuits within days, challenging the deployment under the Posse Comitatus Act, which restricts military involvement in civilian law enforcement. They argue that the presence of armed soldiers on city streets risks chilling free expression and undermines trust between citizens and government. Despite the controversy, National Guard commanders insist their mission remains apolitical. They say their role is to protect, not to police, to assist in keeping peace, not to enforce policy. Still, images of armored vehicles and fatigues moving through downtown Portland evoke deeper questions about the country's direction. How far should federal power extend inside the states? Where does the line between public safety and civil liberty truly lie? Political analysts suggest that Portland is likely to become a template for future conflicts between Washington and the states. If unrest flares elsewhere, in California, Illinois, or New York, the precedent set by this ruling could give the federal government greater freedom to act unilaterally. For many legal observers, this moment recalls the debates of the 1960s, when presidents sent troops to enforce desegregation orders in the South. Back then, the deployments defended civil rights. Today, critics say they risk undermining them. Across America, the response is divided. Supporters of the president applaud what they call a courageous stand against anarchy. Opponents see a government willing to use force to silence opposition. Television pundits debate constitutional nuance, while in Portland, ordinary citizens prepare for another night of uncertainty. As daylight fades over the Pacific Northwest, the streets of Portland carry an uneasy calm. Police barricades rise near the courthouse. A handful of protesters wave flags and hold candles in quiet defiance. Behind them, the skyline glows with the hum of a city that has seen too many nights like this, too many moments where the line between order and overreach blurred. In Washington, officials frame the decision as part of a renewed national strategy. They argue that America's major cities have suffered too long from hesitation and weak enforcement, and that a federal response is essential to restoring confidence. But others, including constitutional scholars and community leaders, caution that power without limits quickly becomes oppression. They warn that the normalization of military presence in civil life marks a turning point in how America governs dissent. President Trump, however, appears undeterred. In remarks after the ruling, he called the court's decision a win for common sense and said the government will always have the right to protect its citizens. He insisted that federal deployments will continue wherever lawlessness threatens peace. Supporters erupted in applause at his next rally. while critics warned that the line between federal authority and local autonomy had just been redrawn. For Portland, the immediate future remains uncertain. Will the troops restore calm or provoke new demonstrations? Will this intervention mark a short-term operation or a lasting transformation of federal-state relations? Those questions may take months to answer. For now, the Ninth Circuit's ruling stands, a reminder that in modern America, even the streets of a city can become a courtroom where competing visions of the Constitution are tested. As one protest banner read outside Portland City Hall, "Democracy is fragile. Handle with care." And as the convoys roll in, that message lingers, a reflection of a nation once again wrestling with its own identity. Freedom versus control, protest versus power, and the eternal question of who truly commands the American streets.